Stephen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Spencer. It's great to be here this morning.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. So, if you could just start with a brief introduction to yourself and to the business, please.
I'm Steven Sarouche. I'm the Chief Product Officer and VP of Operations for L Charge. I've got around 25 years of experience in the automotive industry. Joined L Charge in 2023, right when the company came from the UK over to the United States, and have been working to get our product into the market and bring us to the point where we are today ever since. And now we're growing our team, we're growing our customer base, and it's a really exciting time to be in this electrification space.
Absolutely. So, could we get into that founding moment then of L Charge? I know you joined a little bit later on in the process. What's your experience been with L Charge up to this point, and what are you doing differently to everyone else?
Sure. Well, a little bit about the founding story. Prior to moving to the UK, our founder, Dmitry Loshin, had about 15 years of experience in the greenhouse business. And in greenhouses, you've got to do a lot of power generation. You need heat, you need light. And so he had all of this natural gas power generation experience. He moved to the UK around 2018 and, began to recognize as electrification was beginning to increase, he really began to recognize an opportunity and actually a need to do something about bridging the gap between the available grid power and the power that transitioning EV fleet operators and EV owners were needing. And so he just kind of thought, I've got all this power generation experience. Natural gas can be a really, really good source for power. It can be very efficient. It can be very clean. And so he just kind of began to work on that model over in the UK. And of course, it started with, sort of like a roadside assistance model. They had a truck with a generator in it and, liquid natural gas in the back, and they would drive around and charge people. And they were kind of looking at that sort of B2C model, but they eventually kind of realized, okay, that's really not going to work, especially as they studied, most public chargers and the companies that were standing up public chargers. The utilization just really wasn't there. Like the numbers just didn't pencil out, right? You weren't getting enough people at the charging station to really get a return on investment, in less than, I don't know, 15 years or something like that. And so that was really when Dimitri, our founder, he began to really kind of look at fleets as the real opportunity, as fleets are electrifying and they have a high power demand that the grid oftentimes cannot meet in a short period of time, right? And so that was kind of where he landed. And then the thought was, well, most of the opportunity right now is in the US. Let's get into the US. And so L Charge came to the US in 2023. And that's when I joined the team as the chief product officer to try to take sort of the prototype units that had been built over in Europe and get them to the US and get them compliant and, really get a market viable product out. So that was kind of the founding moment. And in the first few months in 2023, we really focused heavily on trying to understand our customer base. I mean, our sales team must have done hundreds of interviews with prospective customers, and they really did a great job of documenting pains. I've got an MBA in entrepreneurship, and we cover, things like the lean business model canvas. And I'm a startup founder myself and have raised venture capital funding. And if you can understand the customer needs very deeply and really get to the core of that pain, that's how to really be successful. And our sales team did that in 2023. And what we found really led us to the charge as a service model, which I'm sure we'll get into, where we were really kind of understanding the deepest pain of those customers, which was time to get their charging stations operational. And also, how do we reduce that huge capital expense of, big fixed projects where they're trenching and installing all of this charging infrastructure? Those are really the two big things that our sales team uncovered from a pain perspective as they were getting into the US market and starting to meet with all these fleet operators.
Absolutely. And let's get into that point there of having that different way of actually attacking the charging market. Can we just get into and break down the way that you do it differently to everyone else?
Yeah, so we introduced the charging as a service model in really at the EV charge. I think it was the London EV show in November, December. It might have been like the first week of December. I think it was right after Thanksgiving of 2023. And nobody was really talking about charging as a service at that time, but we had really identified that this is really where it's at. If we can own the equipment, we can monitor it, we can operate it, and we can just sell the kilowatt hours. That's what these fleet operators need. They don't need all the brain damage of trying to switch out a charging cable when there's a cable failure or trying to understand what's going on with their charging infrastructure. I mean, you think about a fleet business. They're in the business of delivering their products, their goods and services with their fleet. They're not necessarily in the business of running a gas station to fill up their fleet, right? And sometimes they have on-prem, fuel operations and things like that. But we really started to notice, look, this is a big enough shift that if we can take all of that burden away from the fleet operator, let them focus on electrifying their fleet and operating their business, and we take care of providing high uptime charging availability, 97% plus. And we can turn that cap expense into an operational expense, right? So as they're generating revenue with their fleet, they're also accruing a matching expense, which is the charging cost, right? And it allows you to kind of keep things balanced and turn that charging into an OpEx, just like the way they buy diesel fuel or gas right now, that was really going to work. And so the charging as a service model was born, and we were talking about it, and nobody knew what it was. And by the time we made it to the ACT show, I don't know, it was April of 2024, we were really getting a lot of traction with that model. And a lot of other industry players were beginning to think about that as well. I don't know if we were the first, but it seemed like we were pretty early. And as other entrants, not just companies that are providing charging, but also companies that are providing, fleet as a service and all of those kinds of things, we really kind of began to realize that to make this transition happen and to accelerate it and to make it faster, we need to bring some kind of innovation to the CapEx business model and get away from that into something that fits the needs of these fleets better and will allow them to electrify faster.
Absolutely. So, what sort of challenges did you face then? Obviously, being a new business model in a traditional market, so to speak. What sort of challenges did that throw up for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, most of the businesses, didn't actually have any fixed infrastructure in place, right? So we didn't necessarily have to come and like convince them to shift away or to abandon an investment that they had already made. I mean, maybe they had one charger and like a small handful of EVs that they had done a pilot program with, and they were beginning to plan to do this big infrastructure project. And so there was some work to kind of help them shift their mindset. But the EV transition is new; it's happening right now, and so it wasn't like we had to come and unseat these deeply entrenched models or way of doing business. We really just had to show them the benefits of charge as a service. Now you can spend all your capex money on buying more EVs, right? Expanding your fleet rather than all these fixed operations, infrastructure, and oftentimes on a piece of land that you're leasing. So you're going to do all this investment, and then you have a 5-year lease. That doesn't make a lot of sense in a lot of cases. And so really, it wasn't that hard to convince them that charge as a service is kind of a viable way to do business. And I think it would really help that, we're coming into this sort of with fresh eyes. And while there are some fleets that do have, fixed infrastructure and stuff, a lot of them are still really in the planning and the transitioning phase. And so changing that thinking wasn't as big of an uphill climb as, maybe we would have imagined.
No, absolutely. I think what I've learned from these many conversations I've had on the podcast is education is a massive thing within the renewable energy sector as well as the EV charging industry as well. And being able to educate the market well enough on what's going on, what's the newest products, how to use it, what sort of EV infrastructure you actually need in your business is key, because it's all well and good understanding the pain points like you say, which is vital. But if people don't understand the benefits or where it could fit in with their business, I think it's a very hard sell. And I think a lot of companies aren't doing the education correctly. So on that point then, what are you guys doing to actually educate your market and your people that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, that's really a fantastic point. And, what I found is a lot of the fleet operators that we talk to, it's guys and gals that have been running diesel fleets for years. And it's a big shift for them to go from a diesel fleet or an ICE fleet to an EV fleet. There's a lot of different thinking, right? And early on, and we still see this today, like we've got to do education on the difference between kilowatts and kilowatt hours, right? And what is your charging rate and what kind of rate can your vehicles take? And you can't assume that they understand any of that stuff. You can't assume that they understand the difference between a level 2 and a level 3 charger. In fact, early on, we had a customer contract signed. They had some trucks. We had gone through everything, even talked about level 3 charging, right? And they showed up with their trucks to kind of do a final interoperability test after they took delivery. And all the trucks had were, level 2 charging ports. They were not capable of level 3 charging. And it turns out that the fleet operator at the truck company, he just didn't know the difference. And so when he ordered the trucks, like he was like, I don't know what this $5,000 option is for, a CCS1 connector. Right. And so he didn't get it. And that was a really early lesson learned for us and our sales team, that we have got to go above and beyond when we're educating and talking to our customers. They need to understand things like dwell time. How long do you have to recharge your trucks, right? What sort of power can your trucks actually take? Because a lot of heavy trucks can't charge very fast. maybe 130 or 150 kilowatts. There are some that can charge faster, but a lot of them are on like 400-volt architectures, and they just can't take that much power. And so education is really, really important. And our sales team bears most of the brunt of that. We do a lot of marketing, like we put out some white papers. We do things like the podcast here. We've done some other engagement activities with different thought leaders around to try to help kind of break down those knowledge barriers and help these fleet operators understand everything that's involved with the transition. You really can't assume anything. I always try to start with the beginning and make sure that, even the difference between a kilowatt and a kilowatt hour is something that they understand. And just to take a humble approach, right? Just be like, hey, listen, before we get going, let's just talk about the basics here. What's the size of the batteries in your vehicles? Well, I don't know. Okay, well, great. Let's go look that up, right? And then we just kind of step through the process to help them understand really what their charging need is. And then if our solution is a good fit for that.
No, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of that within the industry, especially around the AI side of things, where people see EVs and AI as the things that they need to have in the business without having a necessity or a problem to solve first. Going back to the education point, being able to educate someone on, well, let's have a look at what you've got going on first to identify the problem before we find the solution. So what we found is through the many conversations of the podcast and speaking to clients and things is a lot of people just get AI or EVs or whatever it might be, the newest thing in the market, just for the sake of it, just to say that they've got it within the business, but it doesn't actually solve any sort of problem. So being able to, again, educate them properly and actually find a succinct way of, hey, listen, this is what we can do, and that's the place that we can help. Or even just going into it as a curious person and just saying like, listen, there's no fit here, but in terms of the future, this is what you should be doing. And that's how I think you differ from other competitors in the market when you actually approach it from a relationship based approach rather than, hey, listen, I need to sell you this because I need to hit my targets for the end of the quarter. So I think the education point is really, really key.
Yeah, and the relationship is critical for us because once we deploy our system to a customer site, we're on that site. We're on that site to perform maintenance. We're on that site to keep the charging systems up and running. We're on that site. We're interfacing with those customers, frequently. And so it's not a one and done type of scenario for us where we're going to go sell a bunch of stuff and walk away and hope that you never call for a warranty issue. Right. We are monitoring, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of this, but we monitor over 200 data points in real time from every single charger that we deploy. So we know when something's going wrong or when utilization is changing or when there's an issue. And we have these open lines of communications with every one of our customers. Oftentimes we'll do, shared Slack channels with their fleet operators. We'll do, WhatsApp chats, whatever it takes to stay in contact with those team members that are on the ground there, at our customer sites, to make sure that they're successful, because most of these fleets, they don't necessarily have a backup charging option, right? Our system is what they've got. And if it goes down, then they're, driving to, some public charging station to try to recharge their fleet. So that the relationship piece is really important. And that does start at the very beginning with that education, really understanding the pain and if we're fit, and then how we can work together long term.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that, 100%. So you actually mentioned that you guys at L Charging have created and published some white papers, and I was just wondering if you could share some insights from any of these findings that you guys have made.
Yeah, so we've done a few white papers. I mean, the first question a lot of people ask is, well, what? You're charging EVs with, fossil fuels? And the answer is, yeah, we are. But from a carbon intensity perspective, we can actually do it with natural gas in a very, very efficient and carbon friendly way. And in fact, just with our standard natural gas operations, the carbon intensity of our power is lower than the grid power of a handful of states. Now, a lot of states are mixing in solar and wind, and so they're bringing that carbon intensity down. But that's where we can begin to do things like we can bring in renewable natural gas, RNG, as it's kind of known. We can bring in flare gas. We have a partner who captures the gas that is typically flared at well sites and just burns straight into the atmosphere. They can capture that, they can clean it, and we can actually operate a charging site off of that flare gas. And that brings the carbon intensity way down, because by the time we burn it through our high efficiency, power generation system, the carbon that comes out the other end is like very, very low. And so when we employ some of those alternative fuel sources, which are oftentimes, it costs more than just standard natural gas, but it's often just a small, maybe 5 or 8 cents per kilowatt hour kind of price increase, depending on where you are. We can get the carbon intensity of our power below the grid in almost every state. There are a couple states that have like, it's almost zero, like Vermont, but so we can't beat that. But we can beat most states. And so when it comes to sustainability, a fleet, part of what we have to help the fleet think about is, okay, look, you're operating a diesel fleet right now. If we can get that diesel fleet off the road 3 years earlier, because I can give you charging now instead of waiting for 3 years for you to have your, grid connection that can actually support the 15 megawatts or however much power you need to charge all your diesel trucks, right? If I can take that diesel fleet off the road 3 years in advance, how much carbon are we saving over that 3 years, right? Of switching from diesel to battery electric. Then, okay, let's blend our fuel source. Maybe we're not going to do 100% RNG, but let's blend it. Let's do 10% or let's do 20%, right? And begin to bring the carbon footprint of that down. And so we have a number of white papers. You can find them on our LinkedIn, on our company's LinkedIn page. And I would encourage you, if you have a question, give us a call. We've got some great team members that have a lot of experience with sustainability, and we can talk through all of those challenges and help understand the nuances of, each and every situation. And if our solution is going to be able to help you meet, your carbon sustainability needs.
No, absolutely. And I think that word sustainability is a hot topic at the minute. I think it's probably thrown around a little bit too much, and it's a bit of a trend for companies to mention. But can we just get into how like your mobile charging stations and solutions actually help businesses meet their sustainability goals?
Yeah. So, kind of what I mentioned before is the speed at which you can make the transition, right? So if sustainability is a goal and you have, 50 diesel trucks, or, let's just we have a number of companies that do ride sharing, and they're looking at all these ICE cars, and they might have 500 of them, and they're doing oil changes, and they're doing all the stuff, and they're burning gas, and they look at, okay, can we transition to EVs? Can we get, put 500, Teslas or, Kias on the road and eliminate all of that carbon? And they'd love to do that. Their cost per mile is less, so they can actually offer a better service at a higher, profit margin because of the cost per mile improvements. But they can't do that without the power. And when you talk about having to charge a fleet of, let's just call it 250 Teslas, okay, and they're going to drive an 8-hour shift, and they're going to come and get recharged, and they're going to drive another 8-hour shift, 2 shifts a day, or sometimes 3 shifts a day. It's hard to do that with EVs unless you have on-prem fast charging with high uptime and high reliability. And so for us, we've been able to help those companies make that transition much, much faster, and also save their money. They're not spending $500,000 or $1 million or $2 million on a charging infrastructure project. Instead, they're repurposing that capital into buying more EVs and buying them faster. And we have a whole interview and a white paper with Ride Alto and how we've helped them to be able to actually grow and scale faster, because they didn't have to spend all this money on charging infrastructure. They came to us. Our charge as a service model really worked for them, and are happy to share more about exactly kind of how that works. But it really helped them to accelerate that transition. And so, we're not fighting the grid. The grid's not our enemy. Time is our enemy, right? Time is our enemy. And we are able to come and basically fight that time battle more effectively to get that transition happening faster.
No, absolutely. And I think this is a good opportunity for us to actually get into the charging as a service, because I think a lot of people hear as a service and then automatically think like Spotify or a SaaS product or something. But obviously with the charging infrastructure, it's obviously a physical thing, isn't it? It's in one place at one time. So can we just get into that and break down the charging as a service?
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah. So, I mean, one way you can kind of think about charge as a service is kind of like it's like a pay as you go type of offering. It's honestly not that different from like the old cell phone plans of the, late 90s and early 2000s, where you had a block of minutes. And then if you went over, you had to pay for additional minutes. Now we don't, take advantage of the overages, but essentially what we do is we work with a fleet operator to understand their daily charging needs, or we can even look at it on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis, kind of depending on the way the fleet runs. And we'll essentially set up a contract that has basically a minimum level of charging that needs to occur per day. And they have to meet that minimum. And we structure it to where we know they're going to meet the minimum, right? Because we look at their fleet, we look at their utilization, we look at their, how many kilowatt hours they're actually going to need to achieve their business. Right. And so we structure it that way. And then if they go over, we bump them into another tier, or we charge them a discounted rate for every kilowatt over that. And we just adjust that on a monthly basis. Right. So as they scale their fleet, we can move them from 500 kilowatt hours a day to 1,000 kilowatt hours a day to 2,000 kilowatt hours a day. And then each one of those step ups, we're able to offer them a better and better price per kilowatt hour on their service. And then we take care of everything, right? So they just pay for the kilowatt hours. We deploy the units. We handle all the permitting that's needed. And for our units, there's often not much permitting needed to get started. We handle all of the maintenance. Like I said, we're monitoring everything. And so if there's any kind of a problem, our people are on site to fix it and get that thing operating again as fast as possible. And so the fleet operator doesn't have to worry about any of that. They just charge their vehicles, they pay for the kilowatt hours that they consume, and we take care of everything else.
Got you. So along with the new way of structuring EVs and things, has there been any misconceptions that you've come across with developing this new way of doing things?
Yeah, there certainly are misconceptions. I mean, with our mobile charging state solution, which we could talk a bit more about kind of what that looks like. When people hear mobile charging, they immediately kind of think of temporary or it's not very good, right? This is just a short-term stopgap, right? And so, the thought is this isn't going to be as good as the grid or it's not long-term. But so far, in every single case that we've had, as soon as the customer experiences our system on their premises and operating, they want more. And they realize that actually this is a really, really good solution. It works. It's easy. We have an incredible amount of technology that sits on top. We've got, mobile web apps. So the guys and gals that are out there plugging vehicles in and shuffling them around, they can pull up their phone and see the charging status of any vehicle that's being charged by our system. We've got a lot of things that make their job easier. And they just start to realize like, hey, look, even though it showed up here on a trailer on wheels and it's quote unquote mobile, actually, this is a long-term solution. And we've had customers decide to just keep our system indefinitely and not do a grid upgrade or a grid infrastructure project at all. Or they'll take a little bit of those infrastructure dollars and they'll deploy some level 2 chargers so they can bring vehicles in, fast charge them up to 80 or 85%, and then park them on a level 2 charger and kind of let them increase, maybe to 90 or 95 slowly until the next, vehicle shift needs to come and run. And, look, we're still early, but we haven't had any customer churn. And that's a huge deal for us, right? Every single customer that we've had has kept our system or grown to have more systems. And I think that's just a testament to how well our system works and how good this sort of mobile off-grid type of solution can be at meeting the needs of these high demand fleets.
No, absolutely. And I think there's always talk around the grid being over capacity and things. And I think there's been things in the media recently about terrorist attacks and the grid being one of the main targets and things. So being that off-grid solution as well as that portable solution as well, it just adds credibility to it as well as security to the project as well as many other benefits. I think being able to provide someone with the security of being off-grid, being sustainable and things like that, as well as everything else that comes along with charging is a benefit for everyone involved. Could you get into any more like points on the benefits of your solution that we could tell the listeners?
Yeah, so there are plenty of environmental benefits which we've already discussed, right? Even though we are burning fossil fuel, when you actually look at the numbers, the environmental benefits are they're there, right? We can show that. There are plenty of benefits in terms of letting the fleet operator do their thing, right? You're operating a fleet, you're delivering your goods and service. We're going to handle the charging for you and make sure that that works and is ready every time. Taking the burden of managing and maintaining a fixed infrastructure project on their site to do the charging, just taking that burden away from a fleet operator is really a big deal because oftentimes they're just not equipped with people in the organization already who have that knowledge and that understanding. So then they're having to outsource it. And there are great companies that can sort of manage that, but it's an extra challenge over the company that's delivering your chargers is also looking after them. They're watching over your back, right? They're making sure that everything is taken care of. And that's really the model that we do. We don't leave that burden to the fleet operator. In terms of, just product benefits, our mobile system, like our standard system is 180 kilowatt power. It arrives on a single trailer. It's fully integrated. Everything you need to start charging is included. The generator, all of the power distribution and control system. There is a BESS, a battery energy storage system on there. And there's the EVSE, the actual charging equipment, and it's all there. And all we have to do is connect it to a fuel source. And that can be connecting to a gas pipeline if there's one available. We can also bring in liquefied natural gas. We can bring in compressed natural gas. It all sort of depends on the particulars of the site and sort of where the customer is and how they want to sort of flow their fleet. But basically the system arrives and it's ready to go. We've deployed systems in less than a half a day before, from zero, from nothing on the lot to fast charging cars. And, so that's a tremendous, tremendous benefit. And, in terms of operability and usage, all they have to do is plug in the car. All of our systems are automatic. We detect the vehicle. We begin the charging system. We automatically fire up the generator and begin pushing more power as soon as the vehicle is ready for that. When all the charging sessions are done, it shuts down. The generator shuts down. It all goes quiet, and we just wait for the next charge. There's nothing the customer has to do except plug in the car. All of that distribution and control is handled by us, and that we have some intellectual property around that. And that is really one of the things that sets our system apart is it's easy to use. I already mentioned sort of the mobile web app. They can pull that thing up and they can look at the status of any vehicle on their lot that's charging. And we have customers that have multiple of our mobile units on one site, right? So they might have 6 or 8 vehicles plugged in at any one time. And for them to be able to be 50 yards away on the other side of the lot, but see that they have a vehicle that's about to be at 85%, that's a huge benefit for them because then they can jump in a car, bring another one up to the site, switch them out and get that next one charging. And so it's not just the physical layout or the integration of our hardware, but it's also the software layer that we have on top of that. Our mobile app, we have a comprehensive portal that allows the fleet operator to see everything they want about every single charging system. And then also I mentioned our telematics system. I mean, we're pulling over 200 data points from every single charging station that we deploy in real time. And we're monitoring everything from the temperature of the charging cable, to the temperature of the oil and the coolant and the genset, right? And so we have the ability to kind of be overwatch on that system and make sure that if anything is going to go wrong, we're able to see that. Now, that doesn't mean we never have problems. We do, but we're able to keep our uptime around 97%. And more, as we're getting more data into our system, we're beginning to be able to predict when a problem is going to occur before it occurs. So we can send somebody to the site and swap out that cable before the cable actually fails. Or we can send someone on site to do some maintenance on the generator or on something else before there's actually a problem. And so just in terms of the benefits to the fleet operator, they don't have to think about any of it. They just plug in their cars, they get them charged up, and away they go with their business. We're just handling everything for them with really a high class level of service.
Absolutely. Stephen, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today. But before I let you go, where can the listeners find you guys? If you've got a website, you're on LinkedIn, where can they go to find you?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn, Stephen Sarouche with a PH. They can find L-Charge on LinkedIn as well. We have a LinkedIn page for the company. You can also go to lcharge.net. It's L-charge, L, the letter L, charge.net. You can find out all about us. We'd love to talk to you. We have a great team that's ready to help you understand if our mobile off-grid charging systems are right for you. Yeah, that's the best way to reach us. Please feel free to reach out. And again, you can find me on LinkedIn. We are hiring. We're always hiring. So if you're somebody who is in the space and wants a new and exciting opportunity, reach out and maybe we've got a position for you as well.
Absolutely. Stephen, thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Happy to. Thanks for having us, Spencer.